Hey, what's up guys, this is Alex, and today I want to talk about sidechain compression. Last week I released a tutorial about compression basics, and I mentioned there are many ways of compressing a sound, many approaches. The one I want to talk about today is sidechain compression, which is a scary term, but it's actually a pretty simple concept and a very effective way to mix a track, to compress sounds. So sidechain is pretty much like compressing a sound using another sound as a trigger for the compression. And to explain you this concept, I wrote two examples. So I have a trader example here and an EDM example. So we're gonna listen to the trader example first, but then I'm gonna explain you about sidechain basics with the EDM example, which is much more easy to understand. Then I'm gonna explain you how I use the concept to mix the trader track. So let's listen to the trader track first. So there are a few ways in which I use sidechain compression here, but they are much more subtle than I did in the EDM example. And so to explain you the basics of sidechain, let's check out this EDM thing. So when you hear EDM music, or rather old EDM music, sometimes it sounded something like this, right? This type of bumpy feeling to it. This is given to it by sidechain, because if we had the same sounds without sidechain compression, this is what they would sound like. Compared to So what is happening? What is happening is pretty much like sort of an automation on the volume of the pad, bass, and lead. But rather than having an automation, like drawing an automation manually, I use the sidechain compression to trigger those volume changes automatically whenever the kick strikes or whenever the kick comes in, because I'm using the kick as a sidechain source for the lead, pad, and bass compression. So whenever the kick hits, the compression of these three sounds triggers, and it lowers the volume in that, ducking sort of way. Like you can see it here in the compressor, it goes down and up, down and up. So the way I did this is there are many ways of doing this, and it's different for every DAW and different for every plugin you use, but the concept behind it, I think it's the same. So in FL Studio, if you want to sidechain with the FL Studio default compressor, which is frequency limiter, what you do is you go on the mixer track containing the sound that you want to use as a source or a trigger for the sidechain compression. And then once you have that, you chose your sidechain trigger, what you do is that you pretty much go below the mixer track that has the sound that you want to compress. You right click on the arrow here and you click on sidechain to this track. This is gonna send the signal of this channel, the signal of the kick, to the bass mixer track, but without sending the actual audio. It's just gonna send the transient or volume information so that the bass now reads the volume of the kick, but it doesn't, like the kick doesn't get, the audio doesn't get here. So you do not have the audio of the kick in the bass mixer track. You just have the information of the volume of the kick. Now, when you go in the FL Studio compressor, FL limiter, when you go in compressor mode, you have a sidechain block here where you can select a sidechain source from all the different signals that are being sent to this particular mixer track. Right now, it only has the kick as signal which is being sent to it, so I can select the kick only. Now that I selected the kick as a sidechain, what the compressor is going to do is pretty much it's going to use this sidechain source volume information to to trigger the compression. So the threshold, when the volume of the sidechain signal, which is the kick, is gonna go over the threshold here. The compression is gonna be triggered on the bass based on the parameters I picked on the compressor. So this is what it sounds like when the bass is sidechained. Compared to, sorry. So yeah, pretty much it gets triggered whenever the kick hits. Now, this is one way you can use it in EDM, but with this concept, you can do pretty interesting stuff. So the concept of sidechaining, it ducks out sounds when a certain sound comes in. This is useful if you want a sound to not get drowned in the mix, because if I disable sidechain in this EDM part, we wouldn't hear the kick anymore, almost. Because it's cluttered and crowded, but since we have that sidechain, what we do is that we automatically duck out all the sounds except the kick when it hits, so that the kick, when it hits, we can hear it clearly. So yeah, that's the main thinking behind sidechain. Now, in EDM, you can use it to create that four on the floor, ducking, bumpy effect. But in trailer music, so there are many ways in which you can use it in trailer music. There are many ways in which you can use it in any type of music, really. But in trailer music, in this example especially, I used it to make the trailer hits shine. So with trailer hits, I mean this sounds here. So in this example, we have you know, brass, strings, etc. playing. And they sound very huge. And if I, you know, this is very subtle, by the way. It's not like in EDM. EDM, it's very, very evident that sidechain is going on. But in this thread example, I used it very lightly. But yeah, we have this huge, massive, you know, strings and brass, etc. and Brahms going on. And if we layer, like if we put those along with the trailer hits, despite the trailer hits being very powerful, when we put it together with the rest, they're not going to sound as powerful because there is no contrast between, you know, the trailer hits and everything else, because the volume is already, like, the mix is already pretty much cluttered with all the other sounds when the trailer hits come in. So they do not have the same impact. So sidechain, of course, helps into solving that, and that's what I did. I used these trailer hits, and wait a second. Yeah, I used this, not the trailer hits group, but I used one trailer hit mixer track, this one, as a sidechain source for the choir, strings, and brass. So when I activate the sidechain, this is what they sound like. Like you hear the volume rises slowly, like they duck out in the beginning, because in the beginning there's the trailer hits which come in. And this is very subtle, but it allows the trailer hits to come in with more impact and more, you know, power, because there is less going on in the same exact moment that they come in, that they hit, because they're used as a trigger for the sidechain, for the compression of the strings, brass, and choir. Now, another way I use sidechain in this example again is, I think, with the strings, because again, I have so much going on that sometimes I just want some elements to duck out to let some other elements come in more impactfully, and that was the case with the strings and the the Brahms and etc. So the string section goes something like this. when you add this together with everything else, it can sound a bit confusing. And I felt that the strings could use some, volume automation when the Bram came in. So I wanted to do something like I lower the volume when the Bram comes in, and when the Bram goes out, I let the strings return to their normal volume again. So I wanted to alternate and let the Bram dominate for a second when it came in by removing everything else, removing the strings a bit. So instead of doing an automation manually for every single time the Bram hit, I decided to use the sidechain compression once again, but I used the Brams as a trigger. So you can see here the Brams group is being sent as sidechain, it sends sidechain information to the strings mixer track, and I have a compressor on the strings mixer track that uses that as a trigger, etc. So you can see here the strings go low and then they go back to their normal volume after the Bram is done. Now, this is the same concept as in the EDM track, but I'm using it differently. Now, people may ask, why don't you draw manual automations? You would waste less time. And while that's true for some cases, in other cases it's not. And it's much more simple to use, sidechain instead of doing volume automation. Because say, for example, I have the percussion section here. Sorry, this. Say, for example, I wanted to sidechain something based on the percussion. Like sidechain the riser, for example, based on the accents of the percussion. Now, if I had to do that manually with automations, it will be terrible. It will take too much time and, it wouldn't be worth it. But thanks to sidechain, I can do it very easily. So what I did, I actually did it in this track, but it's really subtle again, it's difficult to hear. But what I did is I used one contact patch of Epic Toms as a sidechain trigger, and you cannot hear it even in the track because I decided to isolate this and only use it as a sidechain trigger. So I'm gonna show it to you now. This is what it sounds like. These are the accents of the percussion section I wrote. And I didn't send this to the master, I just sent this as a sidechain signal to the risers group mixer track. Now, what I did is I naturally went on the compressor on the risers, and I put those toms as sidechain source, and I set my threshold and everything. This way, the riser is gonna be compressed based on the accents, which we again cannot hear in audio form. Like this sidechain accent thing, we cannot hear it in audio form, but it's still having an effect on the riser. So this is what the riser sounds like. Here. Oh, what happened? All right. Like you can see here, there is some automations going on. It goes down and up based on the accents. Now, this is just done to, duck out the riser when the percussion strikes. Maybe that wasn't the best example, but yeah, say for example, you're writing a metal track, and you have this massive wall of guitars and bass going on, which sound amazing, and you have the drum kit as well, but doesn't sound as big as you'd like to because in comparison to the guitars, etc., it's not it's not louder, so there's no contrast between them, and it makes the drum kit sound a little bit dull. Sorry. A way in which you can avoid this problem, in which you can make the drum kit cut through again, is sidechain compression. You can use the kick and the snare of the drum kit as sources for sidechain compression on the guitars and the bass. This way, whenever the kick or snare hit, the volume of the guitars and the bass is gonna duck out for a portion of a millisecond that you can set with the compressor parameters. And since it's just gonna be milliseconds, a portion of few milliseconds, I meant. Since it's just gonna be a few milliseconds of a volume ducking, it's not gonna be as hearable, and it's gonna sound amazing because that way the drum kit is gonna cut through the mix without you having to increase its volume and unbalancing the rest of the mix. So that's just an example in which you can use it. But yeah, in generally speaking, you can use it to make a certain element cut through the mix more. So that's a very, very useful technique. And that's it for sidechain compression. I know this might sound weird, so I suggest you to go and try it right away just to understand how to use it. Also, there's different ways of using like the concept is the same, but the way you apply it changes depending on the DAW you're on. So if you don't know how to use sidechain compression in your DAW, go on Google and search like Cubase sidechain or Logic Pro how to sidechain, because every DAW has its own way, but the concept is the same. And apart that, if you have questions about this tutorial, let me know in the comments, because maybe I forgot to mention something or I didn't explain something correctly or thoroughly. But yeah, also a lot of you guys have been asking me if I do private lessons, and I did in the past, and I'm gonna resume doing them, I think, in a couple of weeks from now. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned on this channel or my Facebook page, because I'm gonna announce it on both. And private lessons, we can discuss about anything about how to write orchestral music, how to produce it, how to increase the level of your production, your mixing and mastering skills, stuff like that. And workflow tips and tricks, and how to develop yourself a career and the type of mindset you need to have to do so, and all of those good things. But there are some things that I cannot explain you because I do not know them. So for example, music theory, I compose music entirely by ear. My theory and understanding is very basic, so there is no way in hell in which I can explain you music theory. Sorry. Also, playing an instrument, that's another thing I'm in the process of figuring out myself. So it's something, again, I cannot explain you. So there are some limits towards what I can explain on my private lessons and what I can't. But generally speaking, what you see me do on this YouTube channel and things about my professional career, those are all things I can explain you. If you want to learn how to write threaded music and get placements, that's one thing I can help you into. But if you want to learn how to write, I don't know, very classical Mozart type of music, I'm afraid I cannot do that. I cannot explain you that. But yeah, I suggest you though to get that private lesson, because every one of us is in its own subjective, path. Every one of us is in its own situation. And these tutorials I make on YouTube for free are pretty much for everyone. But again, they're pretty much objective. They do not go in depth in the different subjective perspectives. So if you want some advice based on your own personal perspective and personal situation, actually getting one-on-one tutoring with me or even anyone else is very useful, because it allows us as teachers to really give you advice that is useful for you personally. So if you want some direction and advice and tips from me on anything about orchestral music and developing a music composer career, feel free to get or to request one private lesson when I do resume making them in the future. So yeah, and also, if you want to learn more about how to write orchestral music, you might want to check the rest of this channel out, because I make lots of tutorials and I keep on releasing them about how to write orchestral music, how to mix it, and how to master it. And I also started making videos where I give tips and tricks to increase your workflow as a composer, and also live streams where I compose tracks completely from scratch, so you guys can see the process of a professional or something like that, and grow and understand a bit by seeing me compose. And I had a lot of positive comments already on the first live stream I posted from people who said that they are learning a lot more thanks to the live streams. So I'm gonna keep on making those. There's a new live stream episode about Pirates of the Caribbean, which is gonna be dropping this week, later this week, I think. And yeah, if you missed it, you can go back and check out the first two episodes where I started to compose that Hans Zimmer Pirate of the Caribbean track from scratch, so you guys can see how I compose music and how Hans Zimmer composes it too. Because again, in the Pirates of the Caribbean track, I'm recomposing a Hans Zimmer track. So that's really interesting to watch if you want to learn more about how to write that type of music. So yeah, check out the rest of the channel. Definitely do it. And do share it with a friend who might earn value out of it. And yeah, that will be it for this tutorial. Sorry for the long outro. But if you stood and listened, thank you. And as usual, I'll see you later.